There are those who die standing up, and not out of heroism, they die out of stubbornness. They die slowly inside, insisting on broken relationships, on careers that became prisons, on projects that stopped making sense years ago. Not because they believe, but because they no longer know who they would be if they gave up. Giving up has become synonymous with weakness. Society loves to reward what continues, even when continuing is falling ill. Whoever gives up halfway is judged as unstable, cowardly, lazy. And the phrase, "never give up," has become a stupid mantra, repeated by people who never paid the price of maintaining something that has already died. The truth? Giving up is sometimes the only way to stay alive. There are women who insist on a toxic marriage because they have already been in it for 12 years. There are people who finish a university degree hating every semester, but afraid to disappoint their parents. And there are those who pursue a dream that turned into a nightmare because they already spent too much money to abandon it now. These people are not weak, they are hostages. Hostages of a culture that glorifies persistence and criminalizes lucidity. We learned that quitting is failure, but no one taught us that remaining can also be a failure. No one tells you that insisting can cost you time, mental health, identity, that there is a type of exhaustion that does not come from doing too much, but from doing what no longer makes sense. Let's be clear about something from the start. Not everything we start deserves to be finished. And furthermore, there are things that only start to work after we have the courage to renounce what was holding us back. This video is not about how to keep going at all costs. It is about recognizing the cost of keeping going. It is about the rare and necessary courage to say, enough. Have you realized that continuing something that no longer makes sense is more tiring than any physical effort? It is not a tired body. It is an exhausted mind, a soul imploding. It is the type of exhaustion you feel when you wake up, even before the day begins. We romanticize persistence, but we don't measure what it consumes. Because the brain charges a price. It has a limit. And that limit is not about willpower. It is about chemistry, focus, and real cognitive exhaustion. Whoever says you must continue because you started, ignores something basic. The human brain was not born to insist on what hurts. It was born to seek meaning, direction, and chemical balance. When you force beyond that, you don't become a hero. You become a patient. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate in behavioral economics, made it clear. Thinking is expensive. Deciding is exhausting. Processing the conflict between what you live and what you feel is truth consumes absurd energy. Chronic insistence is a focus breakdown, not a virtue. And if you've never heard of GABA, maybe that's why your mind seems like a room full of screaming voices. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It filters stimuli, silences the noise. It is what helps the brain say, "This doesn't matter now." But here comes the problem. When you insist on something that the brain has already perceived as useless, toxic, or without purpose, it begins to fail. GABA becomes dysregulated. The mind loses its brake. The result? Anxiety, constant irritation, memory lapses, insomnia. It is not that you lack focus, it is that you are forcing focus where it should no longer exist. And you know what is most brutal? The more you insist on the wrong path, the less energy is left for what still could go right. It's like keeping a faucet open on a broken pipe. You waste everything and water nothing. The neuroscience of focus demonstrates that attention is a scarce resource. You need to choose where you put it. Cal Newport calls this deep work, but he warns, focus requires purpose. Without purpose, the brain enters a state of defense. It understands that something is wrong and begins to react. Cortisol rises, dopamine plummets. It is the perfect formula for silent collapse. It is not burnout just because you work too much. It is burnout because you persist in something that has already lost its meaning and you don't have the courage to face it. Persistence without direction is not discipline, it is despair. And desperation disguised as determination is what is silently killing thousands of functional people every day. You don't need to insist to prove you are strong. You need to have the courage to stop. before your nervous system does it for you. There are many people who don't abandon what destroys them because they believe they still love it. But it is not love, it is attachment. And attachment smells very similar to fear. Fear of losing identity, of seeing oneself alone, of admitting one was wrong for years. There is an abysmal and underestimated difference between giving up and detaching, but most confuse them because it is easier to punish oneself for giving up than to face that perhaps one lived for years feeding something that was never truly one's own. Giving up is interrupting an effort. Detaching is understanding that the effort was never for what you thought. Giving up can be an impulse, fatigue, an urge to flee. Detaching is consciousness. It is a lucid mourning. Eckhart Tolle says, "Attachment is not love. It is a substitute for love. True love does not bind, it liberates." The phrase sounds nice, but it is brutal because it accuses. It says, if you need to hold on tight, control, maintain, perhaps you never loved, you just identified with it. And you identified with it because you needed a role, a meaning, an emotional anchor to keep from sinking. But what sustains you cannot be an anchor. It has to be a current. Attachments are often ties to things that have already ended, but they still take up space. They are relationships that no longer breathe, jobs that only exist on autopilot, dreams that no longer represent you, but that you insist on keeping upright as if they were an altar. Only that has already become a museum. Detaching is not abandoning. It is recognizing that you were trying to make it work based on an old narrative. And you know what hurts? Detaching demands something few people have: the courage to rewrite your own story without it having to end the way you dreamed. It is recognizing that it won't end pretty, but it will end well. Free yourself from the chains of memory if you want to walk. And here is the key to the mistake. Most people don't give up because they don't want to seem weak. But the truth is, you can only detach when you are already strong enough not to depend. It is much easier to continue living around what already molded you than to admit that it is no longer useful. Because what leaves takes a piece of our identity with it, and we are afraid that nothing will be left. But attachment is not fidelity. It is self-abandonment disguised as loyalty. Detaching is an act of respect towards who you are becoming. And if that requires leaving behind what you fought so hard to have one day, so be it. You don't owe loyalty to an old version of yourself. Have you seen someone being devoured inside for not having the courage to leave where they were dying? Most people don't end a cycle. They wait for it to completely destroy them, so they don't have to make the conscious move to leave. Because deciding to leave demands something brutal, accepting that it ended, even if you are still there. Most people are not moving forward. They are stuck in a frozen mourning, calling it routine. They maintain marriages for stability, jobs for routine, friendships for history. There is nothing alive there anymore, only habit, attachment, and panic of the void. Closing a cycle hurts less than artificially keeping it alive. But like everything that is maintained by the force of denial, it rots, and over time, it rots you too. The philosopher Heraclitus already said, "Everything flows, nothing abides. The only constant is change." But we fight against that truth as if it were possible to domesticate it. Impermanence, when not accepted, becomes a prison, and what should be a natural ending turns into a torture sustained by guilt, fear, and attachment to the identity that cycle gave us. Why are we so afraid to close what no longer has continuity? Because closing cycles requires looking in the mirror and admitting, I was someone who believed in this, and that wounds the ego. It wounds the image we built of ourselves. It wounds the illusion of control. Ana Claudia Quintana Arantes, a palliative care doctor, said, "Death is a day worth living." She is not just talking about literal death, but the symbolic one. The death of roles that no longer serve, the death of bonds that no longer nourish, the death of projects that stopped beating. Closing cycles is a way of dying to be born again. But since being reborn requires going through mourning, and most people haven't learned to feel, we prefer the gray area of continuity without meaning. Only there is a price. And it comes in the form of resentment, apathy, chronic anxiety, and loss of identity. People who do not close cycles begin to become a shadow of themselves. They stay, they tolerate, they drag, they endure, they dissolve. Permanence at all costs is a silent violence. It is no coincidence that so many people develop autoimmune diseases, camouflage depression, and insomnia that cannot be explained by tests. It is the body saying, "It's over. Why are you still here?" Closing a cycle requires courage, yes, but more than that, it requires emotional maturity. The kind that understands that it is not the ending that kills, it is the resistance to it. Many people are not undecided. They are afraid to admit what they already know. The doubt is not whether to continue, it is whether they will endure the consequences of stopping. Whoever needs to think for months about whether to end something has usually already ended it internally. The rest is negotiation with guilt. The decision has already been made in the body, but the mind, with its noises and conditioning, insists on asking permission to do what is already inevitable. Daniel Goleman, in the book Emotional Intelligence, warns that true self-control is not suppressing emotions, but knowing how to interpret them before they decide for you. And here's the trap. Most of us interpret fear as a sign that we should stay, but not all fear indicates danger. Sometimes it is just pointing towards growth. You do not fear the end. You fear what it demands, starting over, taking the risk, explaining, losing status, revising plans, and that's where self-deception comes in. We create sophisticated arguments to justify staying, but deep down we know, we always know. There is a concept called the sunk cost bias. It says, the more time, effort, or money we invest in something, the harder it is to leave it, even if it no longer works. You are no longer there because you believe. You are there because you invested too much to leave now. But here is the tragedy. The past is already lost, and the more you insist, the more you lose the future too. Persistence without direction is a wounded ego trying to save its own narrative. And the ego, when in command of your life, chooses what keeps you standing on the outside, even if it destroys you on the inside. Therefore, any important decision must pass through two filters. Are you doing this out of fear or out of truth? Would you continue, even if no one knew? They are uncomfortable questions, but the discomfort is a sign that something real is moving. Emotional intelligence is not for making everything easy. It is for preventing you from abandoning yourself by trying to maintain an image of stability that has already crumbled inside. And when we talk about self-respect, we are not talking about Instagram self-esteem. Self-respect is having the courage to embrace what you know, even if it hurts, even if you lose, even if the world doesn't understand. Self-respect is interrupting the logic of, since I got this far, I'll go all the way. You are not obligated to finish a path just because you started it. You are free to stop wherever necessary, as long as you know that continuing would be to give up on yourself. There are people who do not change their path, they only change their justification. Deep down, they already understood that they are insisting on what is no longer useful. But every year, they invent a new reason to continue. Family, stability, time invested. It's a difficult phase. It will get better. The discourse evolves. The stagnation remains. The truth is that giving up is scary, not because it looks like a failure. It is scary because it is an act of autonomy. And being free is heavy for someone who spent their life trying to fit in. Giving up in the world of performance is a scandal because it puts you in the role of someone who says, I no longer want to pretend this makes sense, and that makes people uncomfortable. It makes the person watching uncomfortable. It makes the person still trapped uncomfortable. It makes the person who only knows how to exist through external validation uncomfortable. That's why those who give up are viewed with suspicion. Was he weak? Did he not try hard enough? Will he regret it? But no one asks, what if he was the only lucid one? Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote, the wild woman knows when to stop. She knows the rhythms of life, of death, and of life again. That ancestral wisdom was buried by a society that rewards exhaustion as a virtue. But there is a much more powerful force than blind persistence, the ability to recognize when something has already served its purpose. Giving up in its most mature form is not an act of abandonment, it is an asterisk act of presence. Asterisk, asterisk. You look at reality without makeup, without fanciful hopes, without attachment to the heroic narrative and say, "We got this far, and that was enough." The person who is afraid to give up usually lives trying to justify their existence through effort. But effort without direction is just a refined form of self-abandonment. If you need to destroy yourself to keep something working, that something was never worth it. And here is the truth that no one likes to admit. There are things that only begin to flourish when you have the courage to kill what was preventing you from growing. Giving up may be the end of an idea, of a path, of a cycle. But sometimes it is exactly at that end that your life finally begins. And whoever says otherwise has not yet had the courage to do what you may already be ready to do. If you made it this far, it is because something inside you already knows. The time to give up is also a form of awakening. Surrendering to what no longer makes sense is not the end. It is the most intimate gesture of respect towards who you can still become. But this kind of lucidity comes at a price. Thinking this way is not comfortable, it is not popular, and it is definitely not for everyone. Therefore, if you feel that this video has touched you with something real, something that people usually don't say, I have to invite you to something deeper. Subscribe to the channel and become a member to access exclusive content, behind the scenes, more intimate conversations, straight to the point, unfiltered, or use the super thanks feature, that button down there, and leave your mark, your direct support. It's a way of saying, this made a difference for me, and I want it to continue. And of course, share this video, comment, send it to someone who needs to hear it. And if this video helped you in any way, if it brought you clarity, peace, or even a necessary discomfort, you should know that just by watching it, you are already supporting this work. You have no idea how much that matters. All of this is also real support. You are part of this. And what we are building here is not a channel. It is a space of lucidity in a world full of noise. Thank you for being here. Truly.